Hi, everybody. This is Emmy from NRCM. We're going to be starting momentarily. Your lines should all be muted. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining our solar webinar. This is Emmy speaking from the Natural Resources Council of Maine. Everybody should be on mute. We're going to split the presentation into two sections, and there'll be opportunity for Q&A after each of those sections. If you have questions, you can, at the bottom of the webinar, write your question in to us, and you can also raise your hand, and we can unmute you during the Q&A. So for now, I'll go ahead and introduce Dylan Voorhees, our Clean Energy Director, who will be presenting.
Hi, everybody, and thanks again for joining us. We're very excited about this new solar legislation for Maine, and very pleased to have the opportunity and have you join us to walk through a little bit about the background and context of why this is so significant, and also explain how the bill works, what the policy does, and what the results of it would be. As Emmy said, I am going to split the presentation into two sections. I'm just waiting for my slides to advance here. I first want to give some background and context, because it's really important to understand where Maine is on solar, what's happening in solar, in order to understand the bill, and a little high-level summary of what's important and significant about the bill. In a little while, we're going to have Representative Sara Gideon join us, and she's going to make some brief remarks, and I'll explain why the significance of her role in introducing her. I'll then take a break for some questions and answers at that point, and that may be relatively brief, because then I want to dive into a more detailed description of the bill, how the new solar policy works, and then we'll have time to ask questions about that. So without further ado, what's at stake? As many of you know, the reason that NRCM has been working for many years to try and lead the state forward on a new solar policy is because there's so much at stake for our state, for our planet, for our natural resource heritage, and the environment that we leave to our children and our grandchildren. Obviously, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the threat of climate change, but it is the enormous backdrop upon which we think about the transition to clean energy and the imperative to accelerate that transition. The challenge, summed up in one slide, is pretty simple. We continue to rely too heavily on fossil fuels for energy, including for electricity. This is a pretty current snapshot of where New England gets our electricity from. More than half of it is from fossil fuels, predominantly, as you can see from this graph, natural gas. The share of electricity from renewable resources is modest. The good news, it is growing. And at the end of the day, the imperative for changing this picture is to continue to ramp up energy efficiency so we use as few kilowatt hours as possible and continue to substitute clean energy for fossil fuels. And obviously, we've reduced the amount of coal and oil down quite significantly, but there's still a long ways to go. The good news as part of this context is that solar power is undergoing a revolution, and it's a revolution ultimately in price and economics. The price of solar panels has dropped precipitously over the past decades, and zooming in to the end of this chart, just over the last 5, 6, 7 years, the price of solar has dropped even more dramatically. This is paired with and leading to enormous acceleration in the amount of solar capacity that's installed in the United States. Last year, 2015, was a significant year. 8,000 megawatts of new solar, of solar capacity installed in the U.S. 1,000 megawatts is roughly equivalent to the capacity of a nuclear power plant. That means 8 nuclear power plants worth of solar exist across the country on our rooftops and in other places. And 2016 is expected to be a fantastic year. All of this is leading to significant economic activity and job creation. Last year in the United States, a solar array was installed on a rooftop every 3 minutes. And the changes to the solar workforce are really impressive. For the 3rd year in a row last year, solar jobs grew at more than 20% over the previous year. That's 12 times faster than the overall employment growth in the United States. 200,000 solar jobs and counting, and because these jobs are good quality jobs, they're a range of technical jobs, but they're all very good paying, very good quality jobs that can't be exported. That's the good news and the context and the opportunity that we're faced with. Unfortunately, Maine has been missing out and falling behind quite badly in this participating in the solar power revolution. This is a chart from last year that shows the installed amount of solar in all the Northeast states per capita, and you can see Maine lagging badly behind the pack. The rest of the region, in fact, some of our neighboring states like Vermont, Massachusetts, these states are installing solar at a rate astronomical compared to the rate in Maine. And the same sorry picture is true on the job front. According to numbers that were just released by the Solar Foundation just a couple of weeks ago, Maine continues to be in last place for the number of solar jobs per capita in New England. In fact, as you can see from this chart, Maine was the only New England state last year that did not add solar jobs as more and more people put solar on their rooftop and in other places. You can see, again, the states, Massachusetts and Vermont, leaders already adding enormously to their workforce through solar. We know that solar is not just beneficial for creating jobs, it's not just beneficial for the people putting solar on the rooftop, but we know that solar can benefit all ratepayers. And we got a really good glimpse at this a year and a half ago when the Maine Public Utilities Commission put out a value of solar analysis. They looked very carefully and in a very Maine-specific way at what happens to electricity rates when somebody puts solar on their roof and begins to export some of that solar to the grid. And a lot of things happen. There's a bunch of complexity to that, and the short story is that solar power produces electricity when we most need it. That's when those hot summer days, the sun is out, air conditioners are all on, the electricity grid is stressed to the maximum, and the dirtiest power plants and the most expensive power plants need to be brought online to meet our demand. It's because solar power produces at those times of the day, and it's because solar can produce power right at your location and does not need to add additional stress to the transmission system. In fact, can reduce stress on the transmission system, that it provides a benefit to all ratepayers. It literally reduces electricity costs for all ratepayers. Capturing that, making sure that is maximized is a bit of a tricky situation, but we know that the opportunity is there for all ratepayers to benefit from moving forward on solar. It is the lack of policy that makes Maine a relatively poor place to invest in solar. It is not our people, it is not the sun that's shining on us compared to on New Hampshire or Vermont, it is our policy. This chart illustrates the different payback period for an identical residential rooftop solar installation put in Massachusetts, in New Hampshire, and Vermont in 2014 and 2015. And you can see that as the price of solar continues to go down, that payback period continues to improve. But the things that those states are doing to make Maine, make solar more affordable, make it a more attractive place to invest, and that's where the economic impact is coming. The primary and really the only policy device that Maine has right now to help make solar possible is something called net metering. And it's likely that many of you, if not most of you, understand net metering, but I'll just take a minute to explain how it works, because it's an important way that particularly homes and small businesses and even larger businesses have been able to participate in the solar revolution. So you put solar on your roof, the solar starts producing electricity, and that solar can go in two directions. It can go right directly into your household electricity needs, your lights, your television, your computers, or it can be sent as excess to the electricity grid. That depends on whether it's daytime or nighttime. It depends on whether you're using a lot of electricity or not. For simplicity's sake, just imagine that somebody has enough solar panels to produce enough electricity to meet all of their needs on an annual basis. But obviously, they're going to need electricity to run when it's nighttime, and they're going to be overproducing on really sunny days when they're not home. And so what net metering is a way to allow people to consume their own power directly, but also to get a bill credit for that excess power that goes to the grid, and to be able to use that bill credit to pay for electricity at nighttime or other times when they need to use more than they're producing. That's net metering in a nutshell, and it is what has allowed Maine and other places to create a sort of basic foundation for rooftop solar. Unfortunately, Maine, I would say, has more barriers than solutions. One of those that some of you will be familiar with is really dramatic limits on the ability for communities and groups of people to invest in solar together. Many people don't have a roof that is good for solar. They may be a renter. Their roof may point north. They may have trees over their roof. All kinds of reasons why people would want to work together to install solar together. In Maine, we limit that to 9 people, and that's a very arbitrary limit that really cuts into the economics of community solar There have been some projects that have moved forward, but they have really had to be squeezed down to a size that makes the economics very challenging and limits the ability of, I would say, most Maine people to be able to go solar. On the larger business and municipality side, and this is a picture at the bottom of the fire station in Belfast, the way their electricity bills are structured makes it difficult for them to fully capture the benefits of solar through net metering, because they have a bunch of fixed charges that can't be reduced the way traditional net metering does billing. Lastly, we have a Maine Public Utilities Commission that is effectively casting a pall over the solar market, because it has the authority to undo net metering with a pen stroke. And these are two of our commissioners. All of the three commissioners right now were appointed by Governor LePage. And it's no secret that the Public Utilities Commission's track record over the last couple of years has not been particularly friendly to clean energy. So there's a level of uncertainty about the future for solar that is troubling, whether you have solar on your roof right now and you don't know what the future is going to bring, or you are thinking about making an investment in solar, or you are a solar installer that's wondering whether you can responsibly take on additional workers to build more solar, given that uncertainty. All of that has caused many of us to be working together to, excuse me one second, many of us to be working together to build pressure on lawmakers to put in place a comprehensive solar policy that can move Maine forward and get us out of last place. That's taken a lot of different forms, from rallies at the State House to talking to lawmakers to community presentations across the state, and many, many other things that can fit on a slide here. At the end of last legislative session, the Public Utilities Commission was directed by the legislature to hold a stakeholder process, to bring people together to explore alternative ideas that could move Maine forward on solar and try and overcome some of the conflict that has kept us from moving forward in the past. That was a 6-month process that is now completed. It was a very intensive and transparent process. It included a wide variety of stakeholders. I've listed some of them here. And interestingly, there's some folks that hadn't been engaged in the conversation before, such as municipalities, that I think created a really robust conversation. I want to give particular credit to the public advocate. Tim Schneider was really the leader who was working tirelessly to try and bring forward new ideas, to evaluate those ideas, to get the input from people, and to try and find common ground. It is not easy to do, given the diversity of interests that these stakeholders have. And we tried to make sure that the Public Utilities Commission and those stakeholders understood what's at stake and understood that Maine people were really counting on this process to develop ideas that could move the state forward. I'm really pleased that last week we got to a historic milestone. Draft legislation was released that basically codifies or would implement the results of those stakeholders' discussions and those policy ideas. The bill has support from Maine solar companies, I would say almost unanimously, if not unanimously. It has support from utilities, and that's surprising, and I'll talk a little bit about that. From environmental groups, from Democratic and Republican lawmakers, from many of those municipalities and other consumers who are interested in the benefits of solar. I'm going to take now just 2 or 3 minutes to give you a very top level of what this bill means for the state and what's exciting about it. And we'll pause and before I get into the nitty-gritty of how it works. At the top level, this bill is exciting because it's going to increase the amount of solar in the state by more than tenfold over the next 5 years. This chart shows you proportionally the amount of solar that we have right now, which is about 18 megawatts, and the amount of solar, which is about 250 megawatts, that we would have by 2022. It includes and ensures big growth in all types of solar, and this is an interesting change from the status quo. Not only very large growth in rooftop solar for homes and small businesses, which is what we have a little of, but also increases in commercial solar of larger scale, grid scale solar, and a lot of opportunity for big growth in community solar. The bill and that amount of solar would triple Maine's solar workforce. This is probably a slight underestimate of how many workers we have in Maine. This happened to be workers at Revision Energy, the state's largest solar installer. This is what will happen when you add 800 jobs on top of that. So it's a really significant change in the workforce that would be required to design and engineer and install and maintain that amount of solar. One thing that's really important to understand is that the bill moves us from unpredictability, symbolized here by the roller coaster of incentives that come and go, risks by the PUC changing, the governor coming and going, and exchanges that for a much more predictable framework for both customers and solar installers. I think in some ways, most notable, the bill will dramatically unlock the opportunity for community solar of many different kinds and scales and different types of participants to be involved in community solar, and that's quite exciting. The bill also will lower cost for all ratepayers, and that's why it has the support of the public advocate, who's not a ratepayer advocate. He is a ratepayer advocate. Sorry, did I say that wrong? He's not a solar advocate. He's not there for solar or for the climate. He's there to advocate on behalf of Maine ratepayers, and he is persuaded that under nearly all scenarios, this legislation will create benefits for all ratepayers, including those that aren't going to go solar. So I'm going to pause there at that overview, and I'm not sure if Representative Gideon has been able to get on the line. Hopefully she is. And I'm going to pause to give her a couple minutes to make some remarks. But by way of introduction, Representative Gideon is the Assistant House Majority Leader. She's from Freeport. She's served before being in leadership on the Energy and Utilities Committee, and she has been, without question or without competition, the most significant leader on solar policy in the State House for the last several years. We were very pleased to work with her on the legislation that led to the value of solar, and also the legislation that led to the stakeholder process getting started. And more recently, she's worked with myself and Tim Schneider and others to take the ideas from the Public Utilities Commission into a piece of legislation that we hopefully can move forward on. So, Sara, you there on the line?
Hello, I'm here.
Hey, why don't you take it away and give us a couple of minutes of your perspective on this historic solar bill.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me, Dylan, and hello to everyone on the webinar today. So I just want to start because I want to make sure I do something that's really, really important here, which is to thank Dylan and to thank NRCM for the absolutely tireless work that they have done as an organization, but that Dylan has done as an individual, through not just through this process of trying to create good policy that exists in this legislation we're talking about, but in over the years, and especially the past 5 years during this administration, trying angle after angle to find a fit and see where we can actually make progress. And it's been a very long road and could be a very frustrating road, but to be able to stay at the table and to be a part of this negotiation and to fight for the values and the people, whether it's folks who want to install solar, folks who already have solar, or the simple environmental attributes or the solar installers, to do all that has been an incredibly difficult job that Dylan has made look easy. So I just have to say that before I say anything else. How did we get to this place? I know Dylan has spent probably the past 15 minutes or so giving you all some background, but I just want to tell you a little bit from my perspective as a policymaker. And as policymakers, we all sometimes come to the table with a different drive or reason for doing things. For me, in looking at renewable energy policy and specifically solar energy policy, my goals were to figure out how we could really take this industry, which had been relatively stagnant for in recent years, and grow it in the way that we've seen it grow in other states. And ultimately, my reasons for doing that had everything to do with environmental impact and climate change mitigation, but also with predictability for consumers, knowing what to expect, being able to build economic models for their own future, and knowing that they could rely on that and make choices based on that, and also for making sure that we were taking advantage of growing jobs in potential industry where there could be a lot of growth, and where we were not seeing enough growth. What was really apparent to us, all of us, I think, no matter what side of the table we sat on, was that we needed to do something. Our solar growth was very, very slow. We could look at Massachusetts, we could look at Vermont and see virtually explosive growth compared to what was happening in Maine. And we knew that had everything to do with policy and the policies that we set state by state to encourage solar. So, last year when we initially embarked on a plan which would essentially open up the community solar market, it became apparent to us pretty quickly that there was not going to be a path to success for us in the traditional ways that we have been looking at either in Maine or around the country for policy. And at the same time, as Tim mentioned, the public advocate, for the first time, I think, really offered a solution that was different and a blueprint to grow solar, even though, as Tim said, that was not necessarily his goal. But that's the reason why I think NRCM was able to sign on, and why I was able to sign on and say, hey, we're interested in being at the table and working on this, seeing if we can figure something out. It's interesting because right now, as we continue to educate people about what this complex policy entails, there's still a lot of conversation and a lot of concern about how a new program, specifically on the residential segment side of things, how that dovetails with the program that we've known works and that has existed for the past 25 or more years. And I share that concern, and I know Dylan shares that concern. We have done everything we can to build a program that has a lot of safety mechanisms in it, should things not work as robustly as we want, or should they not be working, and should we need to have a plan B. But I think that what I would want everyone on this call to know at the end of the day is that the policy that we've ultimately created here, we believe, is better policy than what we've been working off of. And that we are actually making what is an improvement and what we should all be expecting of ourselves no matter what realm we're looking in, that we should take what has worked and figure out how we can make it even better, and that we know if we look just at the number of solar jobs in this state from the end of 2014 to the end of 2015, that things are not moving in the right direction for us, and that doing something is not an option, but instead it's an imperative. So I know that's all very broad and sort of high level in looking at this, but that's the perspective that I approach this with, and I'm happy to answer any questions or just to turn this back over to Dylan if I have not told you all enough.
Well, thank you very much, Representative Gideon. I guess before we let you go, I'm just going to ask you one question, and then we're going to move on to some Q&A from participants. But you want to say anything about the prospects? When we get to the end, I'll talk about some next steps. But how are you feeling, and what's the work and the road ahead look like legislatively to make this law?
Yeah. So. It's probably a long road that will be contained in about 6 weeks' time, but a long road because there is a lot of work to do here. We, similar to most renewable energy policy that we work on in this state, do not expect the support of the governor, so that adds an extra burden to the work we do. We have a lot of educating to do among legislators to understand solar policy as it exists now and solar policy as we propose. But we also have a lot of work to do in making sure that people out in the public understand that so that they can weigh in with their legislators. What will happen next in this realm in the State House here is that we will have a public hearing on the proposed legislation so folks can weigh in with their thoughts, concerns, ideas about this legislation. That will be followed by, I'm guessing, a couple of work sessions from the committee, the Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee, and then the hopefully a successful vote out of committee will move the legislation to the floor of the House and then the floor of the Senate. So there's quite a bit of work ahead of us still, and it will really, in order to be successful ultimately, it will require everyone's participation and everybody's help to get it across the finish line and to make sure that legislators across the state know how much the success of this policy means to people.
Thank you very much for that comment as well, and on behalf of NRCM and our members, we really look forward to working with you more. Thanks so much for taking a couple minutes to join us, Sara, and for all of your work in the past, and I know that you'll be putting in going forward.
Thank you.
So we now have a couple of minutes to hear any questions that people have had on what we've said so far. I'm eager to go forward with a more detailed description of how the bill works and the details of the policy, because I know that's what many people are interested in. But we're going to pause now, and I'm going to turn it back over to Emmy to see if there's anybody with their hands raised, or if there's anybody with a question that now would be a good time to answer.
Yes, so if you have a question, like Dylan said, you can either type it in the question box, or you can raise your hand and we will unmute your line and you can ask it over the phone. I do see a question in the question box, which is, how will these efforts be affected by the recent price drops for oil and gas?
That's a good question, and I think many folks are aware that fossil fuel energy prices are relatively low or quite low. And that means that it makes for a tougher comparison with clean energy. The benefit of clean energy, whether it's solar or many other choices, is that they can offer a long-term, sustainable and stable price for energy, in addition to their environmental benefits. And when you are focused only on the price of electricity today, or the price of heating your home in the next month and not in the long term, that creates a pretty unbalanced outcome. As I'll describe a little bit more going forward, the bill is really meant to actually go out and get solar at the cheapest price that we can. But it isn't necessarily wouldn't necessarily be adversely impacted by energy markets. It may be that the costs and benefits for ratepayers are different as a result, but I think many of us in the energy field are still confident that these prices that we're experiencing today are not going to last forever, and that the economic bet on renewables is still going to be a good one.
Okay, great. A few more questions coming in here. Another question is, why does the governor not support the legislation? Which might be hard for us.
Yeah, so we don't really know for sure what the testimony of the governor's office will be, and so I don't want to put words in their mouth or speak for them. During the stakeholder process, the governor's office put in comments that were very negative to solar and to the ideas that were being discussed. And so I think, as Representative Gideon said, none of us who want to see this move forward are counting on the governor's support. If we have it and he signs a bill, that's great, but the work for lawmakers really, as in many other cases, is whether or not there's 2/3 support for the bill. So I think that's what we're going to be looking to help achieve, is 2/3 support, so that it can come into law regardless of whether the governor decides to sign a bill or not.
All right. I see a few questions here that have to do with current net metering and changes in the community solar farms, and I know Dylan's going to get to that in the second half of the webinar. So there's a few more process questions here, including, could you talk a little bit more about the legislative timeline to get the bill passed in both the House and the Senate, and when is the end of the current session?
So I'll come back to those at the very end as well. As Sara said, the session doesn't have that many more weeks to it. It's 2 months from now, they will almost certainly be done and gone. So anything that has to happen in the next 6 to 8 weeks at the most. So I'll talk a little bit at the end about what the rest of this process will look like.
Okay. And that's probably most of the other questions have to do with net metering, a renewable portfolio standard here in Maine, and the like. So I think
okay.
Moving.
So let me walk through a little bit more details with people on the bill and how the new solar policy works. If you look on the sidebar that you have with the GoToMeeting webinar, on the bottom of it, you'll see a little plus tag that has handouts. Hopefully you'll see that there. And there are 2 handouts there. And one of them is a 1-page fact sheet about the bill. It's quite high level, but it's also got the key things that are important to understand about it. There's also a copy of the bill itself, which is also available through our website, through the Public Advocate's website. But if people want to click on those when I'm done, not hopefully right now, those are some good takeaways to go with you. So the first thing to understand about the bill is that it sets specific mandatory targets for solar in different market sectors over the next 5 years. And this is a list of those 4 sectors. There's some overlap, and projects could come into more than one of these market segments, but for the purposes of the policy, it divides up the world into these 4 segments. One of which is is, quote, small solar. That's my label. That's for residential, small business, and small scale community solar. The bulk, if you remember back to the sun graphic I showed before, the bulk of the growth in solar, about half of this target, almost half of it, is going to occur in this segment. This is not all rooftop solar, but a lot of it is probably summed up as rooftop solar. Projects in this segment can be up to 250 kilowatts. So that's enormous by residential standards. You might have a 6 kilowatt system on your home, for example, and it allows for pretty substantial commercial installations. But all of that is considered small, and there's very specific mechanisms that are meant to be easier to use for those projects. The rest are different categories of larger scale solar. Larger scale community solar, large commercial or institutional solar, and so commercial here could include a town, a college, an industrial facility, a business park, a big box store. It really is anybody that's installing large-scale solar for their own use. And finally, a significant opportunity for grid-scale solar. And what grid-scale solar means here is simply it's a developer that is selling electricity exclusively to the grid and not using any of it for themselves. The top 3 categories are people who are using solar, who consume solar, electricity also. They're putting solar for their own use.
We just have a quick clarifying question. What do you mean by mandatory targets? Who meets it, and if not, if it doesn't happen, then what?
So I will explain that right now. There's a circle there. 248 megawatts is the target by 2022, compared to our current capacity of about 18 megawatts, almost all of which would fit in the first category here. So the mechanism for getting the solar, there's different mechanisms for different market segments to some extent. These are some things that are common across all of them. The first thing is that utilities will be required to purchase all of the solar output of these different installations on behalf of all ratepayers. So there's really a requirement in here that says we are going to go out and we're going to buy this much solar, and the utilities will have to sign long-term contracts for that. There's a variety of different mechanisms to ensure that we get a good price, or that ratepayers get a good price when they're buying solar, but it really is a requirement, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. So customers who install solar, whether you're a large big box store or the city of Augusta or an individual homeowner, will get a 20-year contract for their solar output with set prices. And this is a really important point, because a contract, unlike a rule by the PUC or a law, cannot really be changed, at least not unless the parties to that contract want to make those changes. This is a very significant part of this policy, because this is what provides the stability that gives investors, again, whether you're a small residential investor or a much larger investor, the confidence to figure out what the payback is going to be and to make an investment. Grid scale developers are paid cash. They're developers. They're just selling solar onto the grid. They're not buying any electricity. They don't have an electricity bill. They're paid in cash. Everybody else is a consumer. We all pay electricity bills, and so those people will be paid in bill credits that they can use to offset their electricity bills. And that's a very similar, that's in fact how net metering works. One important difference is that these bill credits have a dollar value, not a kilowatt hour value. And so the and I'll come back to this a little bit more when I describe the residential sector, but you're going to literally have a credit on your bill, whether you're a part of a community solar project or, again, you're any one of those types of projects that has a dollar value, and it's going to be based on how much solar you produce and what your rate in your contract is. All of that solar output is aggregated by the utilities and resold into regional energy markets. And the profits from that, if there are any, and that's the expectation, are returned to ratepayers. So ratepayers are paying the cost of these contracts, and they're getting the solar. And the value of that solar in the market is how other ratepayers are able to benefit. And this comes down to the premise that there is a very significant value of solar. And if we can capture that, we can aggregate it, and we can bring that into our energy markets, or at least some of it, that's a better way to capture the value of solar. The three large segments, so again, these are the large community solar, large commercial institutional, grid scale. All of those projects will be required to participate in a reverse auction to get a contract. And this is a way to ensure that although we're going to meet these targets, we're going to do it at the lowest price possible. The way a reverse auction happens is that there's one buyer and multiple suppliers who are bidding on the price that they are willing to build solar for. And the law is very clear that as long as there is a minimal level of competition, then the utilities will be required to enter into those contracts. So you have, not everybody wins, but you have an auction where you get the lowest price possible for that solar. That is true for all three of these large segments, but they're all different auctions, and those different targets for each of those different markets means that you have a separate auction for community solar, a separate auction for a large commercial solar, and a separate auction for grid scale solar. And so they're not competing against each other, but within any of those categories, Maine ratepayers are paying for solar at the best price. As I said, there's some particular big changes with community solar compared to what we have today. As I said, large community solar can be up to 5 megawatts. That's really quite large. It's enough power. If it was a community solar farm that only served households, it would be enough for 1,000 households to get their power. It's also possible for community solar projects to participate in the small segment, and I'll come back to how that works. But even that is enough power for 40 or 50 homes together, a far cry from the 9-person limit that we have today. There are no particular restrictions on the structure of community solar agreements. So, for example, shareholders might co-own a project. They might actually, directly own the panels together, or someone else might own them, a developer or an installer or a city, and the individuals might be subscribers. The idea behind the bill is to put as few barriers as possible into the kind of innovation that people have about who or how people come together to do joint community solar. One of the things that's likely to happen, particularly for larger scale, is that you'll see large customers pair up with residential shareholders. So a town might need quite a lot of electricity for its own use, and it might develop a project on a landfill and have citizens able to buy shares themselves, as well as serving the needs of the city or businesses within the city. You might see any number of arrangements where a large customer who wants to use a lot of solar pairs up with residential customers, and this is what brings economies of scale and makes solar as affordable as possible. The commonality, again, all the shareholders receive a bill credit for their percentage of the output. And so if you're a 1% shareholder, then you'll get 1% of that output in the form of a bill credit. And you can take them with you. Shares would be transferable in different ways for people who move. This is, you take it with you if you're moving in the area, or if you need to transfer it to somebody else if you're leaving the state, or what have you. I won't say a lot more in detail about large commercial or institutional solar because it's very similar. The idea is you hold an auction twice a year. You set out a number of megawatts of solar that the PUC sets an amount that's consistent with the targets, and you hold an auction and you buy the cheapest solar, and you do it again, and then you do it again. And that's how we can say that this policy will ensure growth of solar and hitting those targets, but take advantage of competitive markets to get a good price for that. Same thing for grid-scale solar. I would point out that there's a lot of grid-scale solar out there happening in the United States and elsewhere that's a lot larger than 5 megawatts. And it's possible that somebody can still develop and sell solar at larger scales. This program is focused on what you might call smaller scale, larger scale solar. So 5 megawatts is still pretty substantial, but not really a sort of a massive solar installation like we see in other places. Finally, I want to talk about rooftop solar because this is, I think, important to a lot of individual people, NRCM members and others, and it also uses a very different mechanism than the other segments. It's a mechanism that is much closer to current net metering. In fact, it's, I would think you would describe it most accurately as a change to net metering rather really than an alternative. And as Representative Gideon said, part of the exercise that stakeholders went through was to identify what do we like about net metering, what could be better. The public advocate's original proposal for residential solar didn't look very much like net metering. And it was in response to comments that we and solar installers and others made that changed that proposal so that really is very similar to net metering. One of the things that's important to understand about the rooftop solar approach here is that it is literally and specifically designed to be at least as effective as actually building rooftop solar as net metering. Part of the process the Public Utilities Commission stakeholder process went through was to do some estimates of how much solar could we get if we just net metered like crazy for the next several years. And that's how we set these targets. So in addition to being very similar to net metering, it is specifically designed to achieve really the same or at least as good effects or impacts in the real world. Some people have started saying that it's next metering, taking a little bit of to the next level. I won't describe this in detail unless there are questions, but one of the things that's interesting about it is that it uses the capacity of new smart meters that almost all of us have in our house to measure the output and the input in more precise ways. The approach still allows people to actually consume their solar behind the meter, which is identical to traditional net metering. So the solar that comes off your roof goes into your panel when you have when you're using more electricity than you're producing. You're going to use that directly, and the impact on your electricity bill will be identical to net metering. It simply means you need to buy less power in those hours or no power when you're producing. But as we know, some of the time you're going to be exporting power to the grid. Just like net metering, you're still going to receive a bill credit for that amount of exported power. And as I said earlier, one of the differences is that that bill credit comes in the form of a dollar amount, and you know you're going to know what that dollar amount is going to be roughly for 20 years, because the output of the project towards whatever the price is in your contract will be your bill credit. And that bill credit you can apply to paying your bill when you need to purchase electricity from the grid. Very similar to net metering, the bill credits expire at the end of a 12-month period. One small change is that the 12-month period is going to be fixed. But the idea here is still that you're allowing people to size rooftop solar to meet the needs that they have on an annual basis. One other advantage of this approach compared to traditional net metering is that you can use your bill credits to offset your entire electricity bill. Even the fixed charges, CMP customers pay about $11 a month in the fixed charge. Commercial customers may pay what are called demand charges. Those can't be offset through traditional net metering because you're only getting a kilowatt hour credit, not a dollar credit. When you have a dollar credit, if it's high enough, you can offset your bill all the way down to zero. And because of the accounting treatment that is different behind the scenes, the utilities are made whole, and the customer can actually offset even more of their bill. An important issue that I expect people will be hearing more about as this program takes effect, if it does, and particularly from NRCM, is that customers are going to have to start to think a little bit more about renewable energy credits. And if you want to be using solar for the power that you're purchasing back from the grid, you're going to need to opt to repurchase your renewable energy credits. You'll get a slight discount on doing that. That's a little bit complicated, and I can answer questions about it if there are any. But this is going to be something people are going to need to pay attention to going forward. Existing solar customers, there's several thousand people out there, some of them may be on the phone right now, that have solar already and made an investment under net metering. And this was really important for us and for others. The bill says that those people can continue to use traditional net metering for some time to come. The law says that that would be at least until the year 2029. So whether that's 12 years or 13 or 15 depends a little bit on when you put solar on your roof. It's important to recognize that this is a more guaranteed access to net metering than anybody has right now. This would put in law the fact that existing customers would be able to keep net metering. As I said earlier, right now, the Public Utilities Commission, if they wanted, and we would fight them, but they have the authority, they could get rid of net metering even for existing customers later this year. And that's certainly a possibility if no legislation is passed. So this would give some additional protection for existing customers, even if they want to stay with traditional net metering. However, those customers will also have the option to swap into a 20-year contract like that will be offered like other new participants in the rooftop solar program. Those who are installing solar this year in 2016 and into 2017 before the program gets started, they will probably have the best prices available for those contracts to make sure that the market's not going to slow down as we go through rulemaking and some uncertainty on the details over the next year. So I think this is going to create enough stability in the interim for people to invest confidently in solar today. They will start off as net metering customers. They can stay net metering, but they'll also have some preferential treatment to switch into a long-term contract when it starts if they want to. And so before 2029, for any customers who are still doing traditional net metering, the PUC will go through a proceeding, will set a more permanent rate to pay for exports, and the law says that it needs to be fair and it needs to allow for them to continue to self-consume. So those are really important. The last thing I want to say, and this is really into the details, but I think is important for NRCM and those who really believe the details matter. There are a set of adjustments and reviews and backstops that make this policy flexible and that balance some innovation with some continuity so that we're moving forward in a responsible way. The first is that the actual rates for rooftop solar need to be set in a rulemaking proceeding. And those matter enormously. The rates could be the same, equivalent to the rates that net metering customers are getting today. They can be lower, they can be higher. I think the way the law is structured, they're likely to be somewhat higher, but it really matters. And as I said before, I think there would be concerns about empowering this Public Utilities Commission too much. So the program won't start until those rules get additional approval by the legislature next year. And until that happens, traditional net metering remains. And if those rules are not approved by the Public Utilities Commission, net metering stays in place. I'm sorry, if those rules are not approved by the legislature, the net metering stays in place. Another important mechanism is that the rates, the Public Utilities Commission will set the rates that small customers will be paid. But if those rates are not sufficient to hit the installation targets, there will be an automatic increase in those rates so that we have our best guess about how much solar prices will be in the coming years. But if we're wrong, and if the solar market, for whatever reason, is not on target to hit those targets, then the PUC will increase those rates. That's a really important, and that's part of the mechanism for ensuring that we will actually hit these targets and they're not just aspirational goals. Finally, we're going to try it out for a little while before we make permanent changes. The Public Utilities Commission will do a review of the revised net metering program in early 2019. And the program will only continue if it's successful. And successful means lowering costs for ratepayers and actually installing the amount of solar that we have set. Otherwise, Maine reverts to the more traditional net metering. Those are all examples of the sort of responsible policymaking that I think has led me and the solar installers to conclude that this is a really good path forward. It gives us some confidence that it can be successful, that we'll be able to make changes. But if things don't work the way we want, we're going to still have some foundation of trying to build solar in the state of Maine. So with that, I will stop and turn it back over to Emmy to facilitate some Q&A. And then before we close, I'll just take a brief minute to talk about the next steps.
Thanks, Dylan. So there's a few questions that have already been listed, and if you have an additional question, feel free to type it in the box. And if we do run out of time or you have to leave before we're able to answer your question, you can always email either Dylan or me, and we will get back to you with an answer to your question. So let's start off with a question from, it looks like a homeowner that has a solar array, or hypothetically. The question is, if I sign a 20-year contract with Amera for, say, 20 cents per kilowatt hour, what happens if their rates go up during that 20 years? I assume I would get 20 cents no matter what?
That's right. That's what these contracts are meant to envision. There's a couple of caveats to that. One is that I think there's a good chance that the commission will set standard contracts that actually start with a rate that is closer to the actual price of electricity today and have a fixed escalator over time. So I'm hopeful, and I think there's good reason to expect that the PUC and the utilities will want this too, that the contracts would actually mirror a best guess of what's going to happen to electricity prices. For example, you're in Amera territory, starts at 15 cents and goes up 2% a year. That's not, of course, a guarantee that that's what rates will be, but it means your contract rate, it is a good likelihood that it would be very parallel to what's happening with electricity prices. But it is correct that there's a trade. When you get a contract, you get a guarantee, and you don't know what electricity prices in the future are going to be. So I think that's accurate.
All right, and then there's a few other questions related to the year that the credits carry over for a year. One question is, with present net metering, each month's excess is held for a year. What does a fixed expiration mean? Similarly, how does the fixed 12-month period for carryover affect residential solar customers? And it looks like residential customers will be paid only for electricity generated and will net a lot less than now when they get kilowatt-hour credits. Can you discuss these issues?
Okay, so first of all, on the bill credit, so your bill credits will continue to roll over. What will happen is that each customer will have, and the PUC will set a couple of dates in a year. They'll pick a date in the spring, they'll pick a date in the fall, or at the end of the year, and each customer will decide, based on how they use electricity, which date they want to have for when their bill credits will expire. And this is for, this makes this policy more easier and more affordable to administer. And so if you're a residential customer, you're going to pick a date in the spring, in the early spring or late winter. You will have used up during the winter all of your bill credits, and you are unlikely to lose bill credits. If you're a business that does a lot of summer business, you might pick a different date in the year. But the idea is to allow people to accumulate bill credits in the sunniest times of the year and use them up in the less sunny parts of the year and not lose them. But it's still not going to be a program that's going to it's not oriented to having people generate a lot more electricity than, or any more electricity than they use in the year. The idea is that you're putting solar on your roof to offset your own needs. If you want to become a generator of electricity, you need to participate in one of the other market segments. The question about somebody asking about, it looks like residential customers will only be paid for electricity generated. So that's true. You'll only be paid, for residential customers will only be paid for electricity that they export to the grid. That's true for net metering. You don't get a bill credit for electricity that you use on premise today. You only get a bill credit for electricity that you export to the grid, and you only need to pay for electricity that you buy from the grid. So that's the same as net metering, and I think, again, the idea is that you're paid at least as much as you are under net metering, the details of which will matter, and that's why the rulemaking is really important.
All right, it looks like we also have a couple of questions about the RECs, both for community solar farms in particular, as well as more generally the value of the RECs. And,
so first of all, for everybody, a REC is a renewable energy credit. It is the nature of electricity that electrons look like electrons, no matter whether they're generated from a solar panel or a coal-fired power plant or anything in between. So if we want to be able to track renewable energy production and use, we have in New England created this thing called a renewable energy credit. And every unit of electricity that's generated from renewables, including solar, gets assigned a renewable energy credit. And that allows customers and consumers and people who buy and sell electricity to keep track of how much electricity is coming from renewables and whether you yourself are producing or consuming renewable energy. So that's what a renewable energy credit is. Right now, and whoever owns the renewable energy credit, that's the customer who accurately can say, I'm using that solar. If you sell your renewable energy credit to somebody else, it's because they want to be buying solar. They can't track your electrons. That's why we have that credit. So if you're a shoe store like Lammy Wellahan, and you want to say buy all of your power from solar, you buy renewable energy credits if you can't put it on your roof. But if they buy the renewable energy credits from you, then they're using your solar, not you. So it's important for customers who, for whatever reason, want to be using solar to own the renewable energy credits. Right now, many rooftop solar customers do own their own renewable energy credits because there's nobody out there who's interested in buying them because it's not worth the trouble. In this new approach, the utilities will be buying a bundle of the electricity and the renewable energy credits, and that's for the solar that is exported to the grid. Anything you use yourself, you have the renewable energy credits for that. But if you're exporting solar to the grid and you're selling your solar, you're going to be selling your renewable energy credits too. When you buy electricity back from the grid at nighttime, if you want to be buying solar and using all solar, you'll need to buy those renewable energy credits back from the grid, and you'll get a discount in doing that. So that's a little bit different and a little bit complicated. It's true for community solar farms as well. The community solar farms, the utilities will buy the renewable energy credits along with a bundle of prices for their solar. And if customers on an individual basis want to be saying that they're using solar, not just getting a price, then they will need to buy those renewable energy credits. And those customers also will get a discount for buying those renewable energy credits. So I think that's important. I don't know, if that's answering these questions here.
Mm-hmm. We have a question here about, again, on community solar. Will the individual members of a community solar farm have the option to stick with net metering or swap to the 20-year contract, or will the community solar farm have to choose an option as a whole?
That's an excellent question. I will give my best guess and recollection of what the bill says at this point, but I think that individual customers would be able to choose. There are a number of community solar farms in the state, and probably more of them to come over the next year or two. So we've really tried to be mindful of all customers who are going to have solar when this program starts, that we offer continuity. So that's something I'll be putting on my list to check on, but I think my expectation would be that that this is a matter of individual choice.
Okay, and I think you covered this in your presentation, but to clarify, with the new program, is it correct that unlike current net metering, credits can also go toward monthly connection charges and other fixed charges?
That's right.
Great. Let's see here. I think there's some questions, just some clarifying questions about who's in support of the bill, that the utilities are in fact in supportive of this proposal.
Yep, and somebody's asking about Democratic and Republican support for the bill as well. So the two large utilities in the state, Central Maine Power and Emera, do support the bill. They were parties to the stakeholder process and to the finalization of the bill language. I won't speak for the utilities, but I can give you my sense of why they are supportive. And I think it has to do with their understanding of the pros and cons of net metering, of traditional net metering. I don't agree with all the conclusions that the utilities have made about net metering, but I think it is fair and accurate to say that this policy creates a more transparent way of assigning the costs and benefits of solar. And it allows the utilities to more clearly recover the costs that they need to pay for and maintain the grid itself. And it assigns the costs and benefits of solar to all ratepayers, again, in a little bit more transparent way. Some of this is pretty esoteric accounting changes, but they really matter to the utilities. The difference between a stranded cost and an avoided distribution revenue account don't matter to most consumers. They just see their bill, they pay their bill, they want to invest in solar, and they want to see a return on that investment, and they want their bill to go down. That is maintained in this, but it changes the accounting, and that works a lot better for utilities and ratepayer advocates. So that's a sort of a complicated answer to one of the reasons that the utilities are interested in a revision, a revised version of net metering.
And we're starting to also talk about lawmakers. The next step is going to be, and there's some questions here from people also in terms of how their advocacy can help support this effort, including legislators who aren't even necessarily in their districts but who are on the energy committee, or would it be helpful to have towns show support for this bill? How can people help support this effort?
Okay. Well, let me show my last slide of next steps and talk a little bit about that. So the first is what we're doing right now, which is getting folks educated about the bill. We've got some fact sheets and frequently asked questions and summaries, some of which are done, some of which are coming out in different forms. The bill will get printed. For those who follow the legislative process, it'll get a LD number very soon, possibly as soon as tomorrow. And although the bill text is available now, the draft text, the official text will be online at the legislator's website as soon as that happens. So the first step is education. You're getting educated by participating here. You can talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues to understand why this bill is so exciting and very positive for solar. Communications with legislators need to start immediately and continue for a couple of weeks. And as I said, it's important that we get a 2/3 majority for this bill. Traditionally, we've had pretty strong support from Democrats for moving forward on solar. I won't take that for granted, but I also think it's going to be important to communicate, particularly with Republicans in the House and the Senate. Tomorrow, NRCM is holding our Citizen Action Day. That's one example of an opportunity to get into the State House and talk to lawmakers from your district one-on-one. There are also a lot of opportunities that we will help people engage in to send emails and make phone calls to lawmakers. It is always the most impactful for lawmakers to hear from constituents in their district. Sometimes it is important for people on the Energy Committee to hear from citizens across the state. As a general matter, most lawmakers want to hear from people in their district. And hearing from them in person, whether it's here at the State House or back home at the grocery store or in meetings that you set up with them, those one-on-one encounters or on a phone call, those really can make a big difference in how people think about this issue. I think the potential for broad support, given the support for the bill across some unusual suspects, it makes for a very strong opportunity to get the bill passed. This is all going to happen relatively quickly now that we've put 6, 7, 8 months of time into developing a really strong bill. There's going to be a public hearing. It'll almost certainly be next week. My guess, if I have to make a guess, and hopefully within a day or thereabouts we'll know for sure, is that the hearing might be on next Tuesday, March 8th. Whatever day that is, whether it's a Tuesday or Wednesday or a Thursday, we will be working with all of the people who support solar to have a big turnout at the State House on that day. And that's going to be an important message for lawmakers. They've been hearing about solar for many years, but they haven't really passed any policy. And now is the opportunity to pass some policy before we fall further behind. As soon as that hearing happens, the Energy Committee is going to discuss the bill and vote on it, probably by the middle of March or third week in March. And so they will have just 2 weeks perhaps to digest public comments and advance the bill. We'll be working hard to educate members of the Energy Committee. They've already started that process through one preliminary briefing. And I think there's a good prospect for strong bipartisan support on the committee. If the bill comes out of the committee with a strong vote or even unanimous, then the opportunity to move through the House and Senate and get 2/3 support becomes really strong. If the governor does decide to oppose the bill and is trying to convince lawmakers, particularly of his own party, to not support the bill, then there'll be a period through the end of March and April when we'll be really working hard to engage all of you to communicate with lawmakers and make sure that they act in the interest of our climate, our economy, jobs, and energy consumers to pass this bill and not let ideological ideas about renewables stand in the way. So those votes in the House and Senate, could start as early as the end of March and probably will go into April. We don't really have a great handicapping on the level of support, but I am optimistic that most lawmakers want to be doing something good on solar. And I think for many of them, it will just take a little bit of nudging from their constituents to know that they're paying attention and that they are expecting those lawmakers to cast the right vote and to hold strong and recognize the hard work that different stakeholders have come together to do this in support of solar.
All right, thank you everybody for participating today. If you do have additional questions, I added Dylan and my email addresses to the chat box, so you'll have that there. And feel free to be in touch with us. And we really look forward to working with you to pass this solar policy bill for Maine. Thanks everybody.